You're listening to Leadership Recalibrated, where we dismantle outdated leadership playbooks and explore the new way to lead. I'm Lori Lalonde, founder of Her Executive Ascent, and I created this podcast because I was tired of hearing the same recycled advice about what it takes to be a good leader. You know the scripts: be more confident, lean in, develop executive presence. But what if those scripts were written for a leadership model that no longer works? What if the future of leadership looks less like commanding authority and more like strategic influence, emotional intelligence, and authentic power? Each week, we take on the questions most leadership programs avoid, the power dynamics nobody teaches, and the decisions that actually shape your career. This is where you stop following the old rules and start designing the leadership career that fits who you are now and where you're going next. Let's recalibrate. Leadership today is not defined by how much work you can handle. It's defined by how effectively you structure decisions, delegate responsibility, and create systems that allow organizations to move forward without constant friction. Welcome to Leadership Recalibrated, a leadership insights series from Her Executive Ascent. One of the biggest challenges many leaders face today is not capability, it's structure. Leaders are managing increasing complexity, more stakeholders, and higher expectations. But the systems and leadership habits many organizations rely on were designed for a much simpler era. Today's episode explores what happens when leaders stop trying to manage everything in their head and instead build systems that support clarity, execution, and better decision making. I'm joined by Shirah Huff, the creator of the Kinetic Method, a system she developed after years of studying productivity frameworks, leadership tools, and organizational systems, and then building a structure that allowed her to achieve stronger results while maintaining balance and clarity. In our conversation, we explore why leaders often become overwhelmed by the complexity of their roles, how system thinking changes the way leaders operate, and why many professionals unknowingly trap themselves in tactical work that prevents them from advancing into strategic leadership. Let's get into it. Hi, Shai. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I have been looking forward to this. I'm so excited you're here.
I'm super excited and nervous, so thank you for bearing with me.
It's okay, it's totally normal. I was able to pilot your kinetic method. I was so fortunate that you asked me, and I was grateful that you did that because I found so much value in it, but I would like you to share what it is and why it's important.
Yes. So the kinetic method is really a end-to-end journey for an individual or a business owner or a business leader. And the focus is to help the individual recognize where they get stuck and have the tools to get unstuck, but also know what to expect in the next step. And this really builds the core of the individual to be able to process everything that comes their direction. I had no intention of building it in the first place, so it was unexpected, and I didn't realize what I was building. For myself, it started as something that I was trying to protect my time with my husband, my children, the joys I wanted to start having in my life, and also achieve the aspirations of my career. And it led me down the path of reading lots of books, listening to a lot of books, listening to podcasts, and certifications, education, and a whole lot of time spent trying to figure things out. And what I realized when I was going through that process is all these authors and well known books are absolutely amazing, but they're only helpful when you're at that point and stuck at that point. Nothing was ever built together or in a logical sequence to say, oh, when you get stuck here, this is where you start to put tools together. And when you achieve this outcome, here's what you can expect next. I wasn't achieving the outcomes that I was putting my time into to achieve. And when I started to utilize my brain the way it's meant to be is I'm really good at building systems and seeing where things are out of sequence or where there's gaps and just piecing other people's information together to create an outcome. And that's what ended up leading to what is now called the kinetic method, but it was really just a personal use tool. I was taking all of the certifications, the books I was reading, and lining them up in a way that worked really well for me. I was achieving more faster. I was finding more time with my family. Was able to join and just participate in things now because I was more effective in understanding partially where my mindset was. Because when things weren't working, the first thing to go was my mindset. And then when my mindset's clear, didn't always have the tools to keep everything in line. So what I had to do is build a system of both keeping my mind straight and my tools in place. Once I started to recognize that that was something that was being built and I was using it really well, it became the opportunity where other people were asking me what was making me so successful, and I started contributing little elements of the full journey that I had built for myself that I continuously reused, and that evolved into what's now the Kinetic Method. I just wanted to help other people, and my purpose in life is to help other people be most successful, and I hate when I see somebody being stuck, and this just seems to always help them out of it because it's building that core element. That was a mouthful.
Well, no, that is very good, very relevant because I think we are in a stage right now where so many people can relate to that feeling of having so much to do, not being able to carry it all, losing track of where they left off, and then even just having the focus to get back into it and the amount of time it takes to get back into something once you've been jumping around, context switching, or interrupted. So
Yes.
I love that you've developed this system based out of your own learnings because you're right. I've experienced that too. I'm an avid reader and listener of audiobooks, and I love listening to professional development books and then putting to practice what they recommend. But that requires a lot of time and tweaking to really get the outcome that you were looking for. So, as you were developing this and leveraging it for yourself and with others, when did you decide that this would be a great opportunity to turn it into its own framework that you could then share with others and work with others to adapt?
That's a great question. I hadn't ever even thought about it until I had that aha moment of somebody pointing out I had a system and I was using it on such a repeatable basis that it was creating results for others. When I was in the corporate space, I was given oftentimes mentees or individuals who might be on a lower performance level and they needed to be advanced or they were new to a team or a new role and they needed to be able to get acclimated fast and get up and running. When they would send people to me, it gave me the opportunity to not, at this point, I don't even realize I have a system or a structure. I just know that my brain works the way it does and I have a lot of tools and I can easily recognize when someone else is stuck and cater to their need. But I was always using the same tools, it seemed like over and over. And through these processes, when I was helping them achieve significant results, it was another individual in the business that asked me how I'm getting such traction so fast with these individuals. And I joked and said, "Oh, it's just my tool set. I just know what to pull out. And it's honestly these probably 10 things that are repeatable that keep showing up. I help people recognize how to utilize that information, but also understand the mentality behind it. And that's when somebody said, "Okay, so what you're describing is you're already a systems person and you built yourself a system." That was the first aha moment of, "Oh, I guess that is a good description of what's happening here." And that was when they immediately said, "If you're getting results like that on a small scale, why are you not giving that to the people?" Especially when I have always commented about how my purpose in life is to help others. And my favorite days are helping others gain success and get unstuck. And they said, "It sounds like you already have the path. Why not get that out of your head and in front of people?" And that's where the idea launched. It's grown legs and a whole body and has taken off running. And I absolutely love it. It's so fulfilling. I wish I would have realized how my brain worked earlier to get that out to people. I love the feedback I'm getting, and it just further emphasizes this is important. And other people have been in my place of wasting time and money and not figuring out the path of what to do to get out of that space. And they too are spending all this time trying to read or find the next book that's going to unlock all of it. And there is no such book. Really, there is no such outcome. And the importance that I found through the Kinetic Method was I don't have all the answers for you. I'm helping you build the core infrastructure that gets you to be able to learn or navigate the next step without knowing what it is. My system is not built on perfection or the perfect day. or when life is so perfect that you know what's happening and it's so repeatable and you're in this comfort space. This method is built to help you recognize how to navigate it when days are chaotic, when distractions are constant, and you're living life the way life just happens to be unpredictable.
Awesome. I love that you mentioned, you put this into a system, it's how your brain works. You really see like patterns, which helped you to develop those systems.
Yeah.
So, in developing this, how do you then adapt that systems thinking, pattern matching, kinetic method as you're working with other people in organizations, and what level and like what type of roles are you working with to help them adapt this method?
I actually love this because the people who are looking for assistance and help, or even navigating the books that we're all reading, trying to improve our own day to day outcomes, they're high performers no matter how you look at them. They're driven people, they are business leaders, they're entrepreneurs, they're the parent that is coaching the teams, they're the parents that have high aspirations. So it really comes down to the people who carry a lot on their plate and have a lot of aspirations. And the patterns that I recognize within them is it's not that they're overwhelmed or incapable, they're extremely capable. It's just the conditioning of how we're using our brains differently than they're meant to be through the teaching and the training we've had growing up and helping them recognize the tools we're taught may not be working. Now you've been through the process of trying harder and seeing that that's not paying off. It's really the core system and the structure that tells you what to do and how to navigate when things are complex that creates the results in the end. When I realized that this could be taught, that's where the system came together. And the other thing I notice is people get stuck in the same but different spots. So the journey is really helping people recognize where they get stuck, and there's some areas that they fly right through, and that doesn't mean that the system isn't meant for them, because then they're going to probably get stuck at the next step. This gives them that holistic point of view of you're really great here. This is where you might get stuck. Here's how you have the tools to make this more seamless and flow through the entire process rather than recognizing or getting stuck. Okay, you might get stuck here, but we're not going to beat ourselves up about it because you do really amazing here, and not comparing each other and really creating those results.
I love that. So I want to touch on my experience working with it as an entrepreneur, as someone who has always carried a lot on my plate, which is always living in my head. And every interruption that I get, and that can be when I'm working at home from my dogs, my family members, or someone calling me or cause me to jump out of what I'm doing and what I'm focused on and address that. And then by the time I come back and have to get back into the zone, it takes me 20 minutes. What I loved about working with you and working with this method is it enabled me to know exactly where I left off during that interrupted time. So when I came back to doing what I needed to do, there was not a need to revisit where I was at. It was very apparent that I was in the middle of this process. I need to get this done, and I think because it was broken down into smaller tasks that were easily achievable. I know it sounds simple when I say it out loud, but it really isn't.
Right.
Because there's so much that I kept in my head that even just trying to filter through or file through, okay, here's all the things I need to do. Should I go back and do this thing? Or is it more important if I just go to this thing now that I've been interrupted? And I could really get in that mode of being that stuckness. And this kept me really focused on what mattered for today or, the week. And so I wasn't getting pulled in all different directions by my own brain even, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
It makes absolute sense, and thank you for the feedback and for stating those things, because really, that is what it's intended for. And honestly, I feel like this is best for entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs have a mindset that has to take them all the way from the vision all the way to outcomes. And oftentimes in businesses, I can focus down on a couple of segments of really just the productivity, efficiencies, and making sure that there's communication that happens and that extraction. But entrepreneurs really benefit overall on this whole spectrum because as you notice through the program, first we focus on exporting the information and getting our brain out of that storage unit into a processing unit. Our brains were meant to process information in front of us. But as we're taught and raised, especially in the education system, we're taught to memorize. We're taught to hold that information, cram it, and then we don't utilize it, we don't apply it, and really it's just a test and you are graded on how well you memorize things. As we age, we maintain that assumption that that's how our brains work, but we're much more like a computer than we are a filing cabinet. And so, just as your computer showcases, when we use our brains as storage, it's taking up processing even though we're not recognizing it. It is bogging it down, it slows down the system. And then when you try to use it for processing, it just can't function. And sometimes, I mean, you have a complete shut off. Our brains and body does the same exact thing. And that's why this flow or the entire journey is so important. And you can't skip the steps. We do the brain dumping, what you were describing. It's just like, okay, there's so many things that I'm trying to sort out. If God forbid something happens during the day that I get disrupted, I now have to resort everything and reset almost from the beginning. We don't realize we're doing it. It's just a habit we've created and assume that that's normal. So, that purpose of us getting that out of our head is you have to create objectivity. To me, it's like if I ask you to organize something that's in a closed box, you wouldn't be able to even start because you don't know what's in it. You don't know if you're sorting by size or you have nothing to work with to even define how to organize that information. But as soon as we lay everything out in front of you, you suddenly go, oh, okay, I have ways that I can look at this differently. Now I have some options available, and now I can start to think about how to organize and utilize that information. It's so important to put everything out in front of you because when you're holding it in, you don't realize how much information you're storing versus processing, juggling, and you just have to keep repeating that process, and it's just not possible. It's not maintainable, at least, or sustainable. Then we go through the part of alignment. We have to pull ourselves out of our day to day. We feel the grudge of not getting things done, and that's why we're seeking help. Right? This is the point where we notice that we're seeking help but we don't know why and we don't know what tool's gonna help us. And the first thing we have to do is pull ourselves into that 30,000-foot view and stop looking at everything from the ground level. When you're driving a car, you can't see the full path, you can't see where the detours need to happen, you can't tell if you're deviating or if there's obstacles. But when you see it from a higher lens, you can determine what's in front of you. And that's where that purpose really is driven. We focus on how do we make sure that what we're signing up for aligns to that bigger picture. Because I'm sure you can relate to this. What we know, and especially women do this, we are trying to achieve all of the results and create balance. But we don't know which one oftentimes is going to lead the fastest to the outcome. So we have a habit of saying, I'll take everything, hoping one thing pans out. And that is great as a good starting point. But when we don't reassess, then it takes us down to, I have no room to say no and I no longer know if this aligns, and I'm so busy and consumed by what's in front of me that I no longer know if I'm achieving results or if this is actually slowing me down. So that's why that second portion comes in. Then it's, as you described, it's the tool set. After that, that's when we really start to put in how does our brain work where we can remove all of that extra decision making? How do we start building in those dopamine hits? How do we actually cater to the way our brain has those wavelengths throughout the day? You're not gonna be on a constant high. You're not gonna be in your low lows the whole day. How do we navigate all the unknowns and be able to put systems in place that make us most effective and recognize when we're having those opportunities to recognize where our mindset might be slowing us down? So it really is the balance of a tool set, because I'm not gonna be the person who tells you to get out of your own way. I hate that. I want you to have the tool set and I want you to have the mindset when disruptions happen because it's those two things that send us off course. When we get disrupted, we automatically assume we're just set up for failure for the rest of the day. And that's a temporary moment, but it's because that is true. In a way, what the systems we have in front of us, like to-do lists, you're immediately set off in a failure mentality and a guilt trip. You don't realize that every time you rewrite something over and over, you're already feeling guilt that you didn't get something done and you're holding yourself to standards that are just impossible. When we build this system and that gives you tools that stop setting you up in a guilt or a failure mindset, and we give you tools to say, oh, here you go. I have a way of accomplishing results. And no matter with the distractions, since this system is not built on perfection, it's built on chaos. Now I know what to do when those moments hit because they're going to hit. And how do I still make progress? How do I still accelerate and keep that momentum when the disruptions happen? And that's what that main structure is for. And then we build in the mindsets. The wealth comes in later. You can't be effective and start to build in wealth if you can't use your time effectively and you don't recognize where in the path that you have that outcome. So we don't build that in first, we build that in later. And we each tool, even as you described, we step through it. It's a layer. We want to make sure that you get to apply what you're learning. You can achieve those outcomes and start to recognize, oh, I'm building confidence throughout this process. And now that I'm confident in how everything else is navigating, it's easy to layer something in because you're no longer fighting against the grain. You're now finding the path of least resistance. And you're just like, oh, I'm already keeping my momentum going. Now I can add something in. It doesn't feel heavy. It feels like it's equipped. And yeah. And then the last is just compounding those results. Life is guaranteed to change. And when you recognize you're achieving things so fast, what happens when you get done with one project? You sign up for the next one. So that doesn't mean that you don't repeat the process. You have to go through the same flow to create that momentum again for the next opportunity that arises. And that's where patterns come in. How do we recognize where we've been repeating? How do we make the tweaks that then create even more momentum and use that for our own a little bit customized outcomes? Not everyone's brain works the same. So how do we make sure that this is adjusting towards the way your brain works and setting you up for success, not asking you to fit into a one size fits all structure?
I love that. And you covered so much there, and there were so many good analogies. So I
Oh,
love thinking about our brains, not like a filing cabinet, but a computer processor and like how we process information. And I know with mine, I have a limited amount of RAM, limited amount of storage. So when that fills up, something else gets archived. And I don't know
yeah.
if I can ever get it back. I found I would forget things that I needed to do that were on my list because it wasn't the highest priority or the thing that was
Yes.
screaming the loudest. And this was both when I was working in the corporate world, in those leadership roles. There was always fires happening. There was always something to divert or direct your attention away from the work that was on the roadmap.
Hmm.
And so things could easily have gotten dropped. And I did drop things where, someone was waiting on a presentation, somebody was waiting on updated numbers, and you're in the middle of maybe like an incident and trying to ensure that you're keeping up with the team, keeping leadership updated, your executive leadership updated. And some of those things would drop, and then I would never get back to them until somebody was pinging me saying, "Hey, where's this thing I asked for?"
Yes.
And a system like this, so I know you said it's great for entrepreneurs, which I agree, and we will get into that. But also think in corporate world, where especially now leaders are juggling so much. So it's not just about, you have your managers leading teams, but they're expected to be both hands-on leading people and managing up, and then you have your directors who are managing multiple portfolios, multiple teams with multiple managers reporting up to them. And again, like that level of responsibility and all of the things that you need to ensure that you're directing and orchestrating actually get that to the finish line, and then also be accountable to your stakeholders to report
Yes.
those numbers, and then still be accountable to your managers to nurture their career growth and development and ensure that people on the teams have some time with you. So, you
Absolutely.
know, there's so much, and each level up, it just compounds with the responsibility. It looks different, but there's much more, that needs to be managed or, directed or, planned for, and there's the need for more visionary work the higher up you go, and that is something that I talk to women in leadership about now, because I work with women in the middle. So if they're a senior manager, director, VP, and they're wondering why they're stuck, I just ran a masterclass on this to have them revisit, is the work they're doing primarily strategic work or primarily tactical work that their teams really should be doing, but that they've just taken on. And majority of the women in the class had taken on, like you said, the tactical work because they felt like I could just get it done faster, but then they don't realize where they're overloaded. And then they've also just boxed themselves into like a little space, closed in space with just them in it, because now they don't have time for strategic and high visibility, high impact work.
Yes.
So I think I can see that dynamic where it's so important for them to realize and have that awakening of where you're spending your time and what things you need to actually just let go of, delegate
Yeah.
away. And then looking at this method, thinking, okay, how do I even begin to approach the way I'm going to work in this new normal in order to be efficient, effective, and be able to be promotable? So I know
Yes.
you talked about like the wealth building, and I know that that's in terms of entrepreneurship, but I also see that in terms of promotability. And when they can speak to their efficiency and they can speak to, their strategic thought leadership and have that time for that, then that opens up the door for more interesting discussions with their leadership on their promotability to get past the what I call the messy middle of management in organizations. Let's pause here for a second so I can address you, the listener. This is one of the exact patterns I see when I work with women leaders. Many of them are incredibly capable. They deliver results, they solve problems, they keep organizations moving forward, but they're doing it in ways that keep them operating inside the execution layer of the organization rather than participating in the strategic decisions that are shaping it. At a certain point in leadership, the shift is no longer about doing the work better. It's about stepping into the conversations that determine what work gets prioritized in the first place. That shift from execution to strategic leadership is exactly the work we focus on inside the Leadership Accelerator offered through my company, Her Executive Ascent, where senior women strengthen their executive judgment, their strategic influence, and their ability to lead in environments shaped by increasing complexity and artificial intelligence.
Absolutely, and I love that you pointed this out because I realize even how I describe it, oftentimes I do have a habit of pointing out the full spectrum of the journey. But when this was originally built, it was built on corporate tools in the corporate space. It was only afterwards that I actually cushioned on some of the extra pieces that make it further evolved into entrepreneurs and not just the corporate space. And what is built off of the corporate tools inside of it that's super helpful is and that I've used constantly when I'm helping the mentees and just teams or leaders is first that structure, that blueprint. It really does act almost as a project management structure where it helps give the breakdown of here's what you're asking your teams to do. How do we get organized into what is fully expected of them to achieve the outcome and result? It really teaches a lot of those communication tools. This is really the dynamic it takes. This is how much commitment and how important that information is. Otherwise, you have leaders who, when you don't have that breakdown, they overcommit. They have delayed timelines. There's so many things that flaw when we don't have that infrastructure of really recognizing before we start committing to anything how much work it really takes, what are all the key milestones, and then breaking those down into steps. So that's really one of the most foundational elements in this entire tool, I feel, and it is important to anyone and everybody. Everyone has an initiative in their life, whether it's prepping your kids for their long-term outcomes, or a parent that homeschools or somebody who is building a business, right? All of these things are big initiatives that need a lot more than one step to achieve the outcome. And you have to get organized first. Otherwise, you drown in that decision fatigue. You drown in the unknowns, and it feels like everything is piling on top of you because you're reactive. And when we utilize that as the core infrastructure, that's when we can start to tack in how do you now manage your day to day to achieve progress towards these big milestones, these initiatives? How do you start to recognize your mindset and the practice of creating momentum that gets to done? And are we making sure all of that context is there? You'll notice I use some business language in this structure. What is the criteria of done? And criteria of done does not always mean it's some specific metric. It might be something of I know I closed the box on this or I tied it off even if it's not done. In the structure or in the curriculum, we talk a lot about open loops. Open loops are just like in a computer. When your brain has anything that is deemed unfinished, and that could be something that has been in progress paused or we never decided that we took it off of our plate so it's still living rent free. Those are open loops that continuously weigh on us. And we have to make sure that we're defining, yes, we're going to be done with it or we move forward. And if we're keeping it on our plate, what are we doing to achieve those? Or it goes onto a back burner and we pause our thinking to allow anything to come up from it until we're ready to utilize it. And then you brought up the wealth mindset. 100% agree. Wealth mindset is not an entrepreneur mindset. Wealth mindset can be freedom, freedom of time.
Oh,
Wealth
yes.
mindset can be enjoyment, finding time to re-enjoy your life and align to your purpose without money. And then there is the wealth concept that we automatically assume means money mastery. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting when we pull that label off and we look at wealth as those other things that come with life, we can start to evaluate how we're utilizing our time and is it creating the wealth and the purpose that we're driven to. And that's why we layer it in at the end. Once you start to recognize how you can create time mastery, the question you get to ask yourself is now I'm achieving that outcome. I'm finding more time. I can no longer use the excuse, I don't have time. Now you get to start changing your mindset and how do you want to use your time? How do you feel best? When is your energy the highest? And what can we do to contribute to that? And if that means helping you find the gaps in your margins and being able to improve your profits, let's take a look at it. And it's through task management. What if you are trying to find more joy? You want to go spend more time at the beach. How do we find that time where you can still maintain your budget and achieve the results of going to have joy? What if it's the freedom element? You want to be able to travel or be able to be spontaneous. How do we make sure that that is showing up in what you're setting yourself up for in success? And that wealth mindset at the end, we have task audits. There's I always kind of think of it as more of the quadrant structure. What do we enjoy doing and what are we spending our time on versus what are we conditioning ourselves to do because somebody says, well, you're really good at it versus it being something you actually enjoy doing. And how do we resort our time to make sure it's maximized and we're achieving those wealth mindsets that we should be having. That mindset, it teaches us to shrink ourselves in the better good of everybody else and then what that does is we're no longer aligned, we're no longer motivated, and we're not achieving the results that we're intended to. And we start to create that martyr or survivor mentality. And that does not help anybody achieve more energy, more time, more freedom, more wealth.
Oh, I agree. And I touch on that concept in a different way, but it's the same messaging. What I shared in the master class with women, because we do have a tendency to want to please, to outperform, to make things easier for everyone else, taking on the draining work, the low visibility, low impact work, and not realizing how much of it you're taking on, then becomes that positioning. I think the four quadrants is such a great tool to use in any measurement when you want to visualize how things are measuring up. And so in this case, it's what's high impact and what's low impact. And then
Yes.
across, it's like what drains you, what energizes you.
Yeah.
And having that visual of which quadrant are you spending most of your time in? And if it's at the bottom two, that's dangerous because that's the low visibility, low impact work. Whether it energizes you or drains you doesn't matter. Like, I love to do low value work that's energizing, like the fun
Yes.
stuff.
Nice
and
to
you
stay
can
on a plate.
you can get stuck in that mode and just feel
Mhm.
like you're making, you're making headway, but in the bigger scope of the business objectives, it's not. And then the low impact draining work is what burns you out, what tires you out, where you feel like you've used all of your, energy and creativity is lost in that. So I
Yes.
tell women if you are spending most of your time in the bottom two quadrants, you are now investing in someone else's promotion, someone else's success, because all of that low visibility, low impact work you've taken on, you've freed up someone else's time to do the high impact, high visibility work. And you can bet they're the ones that are going to reap the benefits. Let me pause for a moment here to address you, the listener. This is such an important point because it highlights something many leaders discover too late in their careers. Organizations reward the people shaping strategic direction, not just the people executing the work. So when leaders spend most of their time solving problems, managing details, or doing work their teams could own, They unintentionally remove themselves from the conversations that determine visibility, influence, and advancement. One of the shifts we focus on inside the Leadership Accelerator offered through my company, Her Executive Ascent, is helping women leaders move from being the person who executes the work to becoming the leader who shapes the decisions around it. Let's get back to the discussion.
Yes. And do you notice I've noticed this from the books, it's easy to focus on one quadrant, and that's where I felt like it was really important to bring in the task auditing too, because we wanna make sure that you keep time for joy and don't let it consume you. So being able to look at from those 2 different lenses of saying, "Alright, how much joy can we pack in?" We tend to swing the pendulum. It's either all the way one way or all the way to the other, and teaching ourselves that we can have both has been such a phenomenal outcome that I get to teach people throughout this whole process it's just like, well, if I'm doing this, then I can't be doing that. And we have to break some of that stigma or that thought process that says, okay, but what if we could do it all? How do we make that happen and navigate that? It was another reason why I was so adamant about getting this in front of people is I want people to achieve the impossible or what they deem was impossible. And it's so capable. It's just that we let the way society has taught us to shrink or assume if you have one thing, you can't have the other. We have that polarity mindset. And when you start to build tools in, you're recognizing I really can have it all. And I know that I'm supposed to say, I've created a system and it does these things. And absolutely, I have. That's what I created. But what I'm trying to honestly build is a system of trust. I want people to trust in themselves. Because when they trust in themselves that they're achieving the things they're trying to do, they're using their time wisely, they know that their energy levels are higher, their mindset's in a better place, that internal trust then exposes to everybody else. And it is a trust cycle. I'm also asking people to trust in me to help them overcome this conditioning and things. But really, that's all if I have a legacy. The legacy I wanna leave behind is creating a trust system that people can have for themselves and then be able to trust in others.
That's deep. I love that.
I didn't mean to go deep.
No, I love it. No, it's so good because here I am, I'm like for me, I looked at it and I'm like, there's multiple things that came out of it. One of the things was for me was the insight around keeping what I'm doing, that's the hidden work, visible, because a
Yes.
lot of that stuff we keep in our heads and then we do it. It's really hidden because 'cause we're not tracking it anywhere, and we're not prioritizing it or categorizing it or even understanding the time commitment behind it because there's just no tracking involved. But not just that, it's also everything that I was adding there, I had to be really mindful of, is this in relation to what I want to achieve, as you talked about? Like, ultimately, what's my North Star? What do I want to achieve? Is this contributing to that? Or is this something that's way off the mark? Or am I just continuing to get distracted? And ensuring that I was hyper focused, which was super important. I think we started this journey together. You asked me to beta test this method as I was in the midst of thinking about launching this podcast, and you had asked questions I didn't even think about. And that got me really understanding more of, okay, if I really am gonna do this and be successful at it, I have to have this plan in place and it has to be systematic. Because
Yes.
here I am trying to launch this podcast from 0, secure guests for every show and wanna drop them weekly, which is ambitious. And then also I am building my business and then doing my own marketing, my own business development. It's a lot for one person to carry. And I don't think I would have had success with securing the podcast episodes that I did, recording them and editing them, had I not leveraged your system to
Thank you.
have everything sorted out in the right way to ensure I had the right focus. And I had a framework week over week of how this was going to play out and what I was expected to do. So I appreciate you so much for that because I know I say it saved me time. It helped me get the things out of my head and onto paper. But I feel like it was more of a journey too of learning what are the hidden gotchas that
Yes.
I didn't even think about and that you coached me through.
Yes. So, thank you for that because it also reminds me of why I do it, And I do notice that the initial pushback, which is why I probably push back and I'm like, "No, this is the time," is when somebody says, "I don't have time," or "I'm so busy." That tells me we're in the thick in the weeds of it. In just even 15 minutes, where you and I, we met for 90 minutes the first time, and being able to help you achieve all of that in 90 minutes says that we were able to help you get really quick and organized and figure out what was going to create the fastest path and no longer let these other things that were weighing on you be able to take up your time and energy. And we were able to just showcase how do we get rid of those decisions that are bogging you down. One thing that I know I get told quite often is either working with me or using the kinetic method is like taking a red pill. You can't unsee the prompts or the thought processes. And once those are called out or surfaced, you suddenly can't go back. And now you even said, as you were describing it, once you went through that structure, there's so many things that you recognize now you hadn't even thought about, but just planting that seed once suddenly has you recognizing, "Oh, I recognize when I was doing that because I wasn't thinking about it. It was just a subconscious habit that I was doing or a routine that I had created that really isn't something you wanna continue that pattern on." And that is what this really does is helps, unfortunately, pull the veil. We
Yeah.
don't realize what we're doing and how much time we're wasting or how much energy we're draining from ourselves until we take that moment to pull back and reassess. And the prompts are very intentional. I use these because they're the ones that help somebody. It's not gonna be the fluffy language, it's gonna be the one that says, "Oh, shit, maybe I wasn't quite thinking that I was doing exactly what I was doing." I'm gonna be the one who has to let some of those uncomfortable statements surface to achieve the actual results that you're trying to get to. Because if I just get out of your own way, is that working for you? The answer is no, because 'cause you're coming and still looking for something else, and that's really what I want others to achieve out of it. It's not fun to be the person on the side pushing for the uncomfortableness or asking the prompts, but the fact of how fast that creates that outcome for you, it makes it well worth it.
So you talked about like this friction, and I felt that friction when I was going through the process with you because there were some things I didn't want to confront and some things that I made me uncomfortable to confront that I didn't realize I was doing, right? That was getting me stuck in the way that I was getting stuck. So, do you see this type of friction where the people you work with may resist following the system or doing this brain dump? Or I know they come to you for that, but when they really get into the process and understand what's happening, is there a point where like I can't do it this way?
Yes, and the only time that I feel like somebody's not willing to put in the work is when they feel like they don't have control over their destiny. That's the time that I've really noticed where somebody keeps their foot down and just doesn't wanna try the element of it because it's kind of that thought process that comes up of, "What is it worth if I can't have control over the outcomes of it?" And there is a visceral reaction. I even have my own, and yet I still force myself through this process because it's effective. I know for myself, the visionary. I know I'm a visionary, but the fact that I had to actually really get vulnerable with myself and think about, I have to allow myself to think about spoiling my family. I have to think and be vulnerable to allow myself to actually put myself first in these thought processes. And what does that achieve? I'm a servant mentality. I will do anything and bend over backwards as long as someone else is achieving something from it. And that was not always fruitful in my own life. And I recognize how important it was where it has aligned every decision where somebody asked me because I'm a very reliable person. I'm a go-getter. I'm a self-starter. I love to just achieve things. So I'm a natural achiever and a life learner. And that can set me up for, in some ways, not failure, but just a disadvantage. And the more that I practice my own outcomes and making sure that I was doing all of the work, it just continued to validate how I was structuring myself to achieve results consistently. And I was moving even faster because I was aligning myself and using the tools, even when it was uncomfortable for myself. And that's where I know when I'm coaching others, the one benefit that happens on the one-on-ones versus what's in the program, the self-guided program, is I can notice when somebody is starting to feel uncomfortable, our habit is to ignore the question. And when we're in a one on one, it's easier for me to recognize that uncomfortable body language and ask the question differently to alleviate the way I'm asking. And I have tried to practice that into the curriculum to give different ways of asking the same question. That way, with one that's uncomfortable, the next one might make you feel more confident in being able to clear up that information.
Well, that's really good. Yeah, I mean, I personally found the one-on-one time with you valuable, and I wouldn't have gotten as far as I did if I had to do that on my own because of those moments where I would have just been like, "I can't do this," or "I don't even know where to start," or, things like that
Yes.
where I just would find every excuse to not do it, even though I knew that I needed to do it.
And I'll be honest, that's why in the Kinetic Method program, we have those weekly counseling sessions. I don't wanna use coaching because you know me, I'm not the type who is going to just keep asking you questions hoping you figure it out. If I'm recognizing that you're stuck, we're gonna try to move through that faster, and I'll ask you questions that if you have the answers, then sure, if you say, "Shy, I really don't know, can you give me some direction?" I'm gonna give the direction. But that is included in the program because of the fact that I know we need to be able to leverage that objectivity and that perception that someone else is recognizing in our own body language because we're going to ignore it. We're going to go to our comfort zones. And that's why I've also built an AI into the prompts to help also recognize in your patterns of how you speak and how you write into the AI structure. It can also notice patterns and give you feedback on where you might be getting stuck or help you ask questions differently to help you get more clarity. Even if you're not the one who says it, sometimes the response of it recognizes, okay, I need to get more clear, or this is wrong, and it forces you to think of it anyways.
That's awesome. All right, we are getting to the end of time,
Yes.
and this has been awesome having you on. Because I am such a fan of this approach and this system that you created, I'm so grateful that you made time to join us today. I always end the episode with this final question. So, based on everything that you've seen working with leaders and then building the system, if you could retire one old leadership rule from the corporate playbook about how leaders should operate or what makes someone effective, what would it be? And what rule would you replace it with?
Yes. Okay, let me rethink this process here. The age old rule I'd love leaders to let go of is operating from memory, not systems. It debilitates the communication, it debilitates every step thereafter. It's a broken system. And when you have things stuck in your brain that you can't extract, you have become the person who's in the business of mind reading. So, what I would replace it with is the most successful people weren't superhuman, they were structured. Building in structure, asking for help, or recognizing where there's gaps and that could create clarity instead of complexity would be the simple outcome I'd like more leaders to take on.
Yeah, absolutely. Reminds me of like that old sink or swim mentality, right? Where leaders just expected you to understand what they were saying, and that you were just expected to know what you needed to do, what you needed to deliver. And even though they thought they were communicating it in an effective way, everybody perceives information differently. But when it's actually out in the open, tracked, measured somewhere, and like written down, and agreed upon, and we are not mind readers. And yes, and a lot of the work that leaders need to do is really relative and related to the work the team is doing. And how you get that information back, that needs to be a systematic process in of itself. And
Yes.
it's tough. It's tough because otherwise you're just playing the game of telephone in corporate, and that's why things are inefficient and late or just don't get done.
Interpretation is the killer of culture.
Yes.
That's how I see it all the time. It has been proven that when you leave room for interpretation, the natural habit we do is we create stories in our head. And that
Yeah.
creates interpretation, that creates new feelings. And then that has oftentimes it evolves from what's really actually happening. The sooner you create transparency and you try to eliminate any room for interpretation, you have that boundary, you have the communication that's open. It's beneficial every which way.
One of the things I really appreciated about this conversation is how clearly it highlights a leadership habit that shows up in so many organizations. Leaders often carry everything in their heads expectations, priorities, decisions, and the people around them are left trying to interpret what those expectations actually mean. What Shira described through the kinetic method is the discipline of getting that thinking out of your head and into systems people can actually work with. When that happens, teams move faster, communication becomes clearer, and leaders are able to focus their time on the work that actually requires their judgment. And then from the leadership side, it's also a reminder that as leaders move up in the organization, their impact comes less from doing more themselves and more from creating the conditions where other people can execute effectively. Thank you so much, Shai. I appreciate you being here. For those that want to work with you and learn more about the kinetic method, where can they reach you?
Yes, they can reach out to me via LinkedIn, Instagram. I also have a website, www.huffblueprint.com, and happy to connect and see where things go.
Amazing. And we will have those links in the episode notes as well to make it easy for people to reach out and find you.
Love it. Thank you.
The leadership advice that got many women this far will not necessarily get them where they want to go next. This phase of your career is not about working harder. It's about working strategically by deciding which rules still apply and which ones you are finally ready to outgrow. If this conversation resonated, stay with us, subscribe to the podcast, and join me here every Sunday for new episodes. And if it gave you language for something you've been carrying quietly, share it with another woman in your network who needs to hear it too. Until next time, lead with intention, question everything, and change the rules for the better. I'm Lori Lalonde, and this is Leadership Recalibrated.